of the escalating U.S. war threats towards China. And it's a very, very important point. And some people might consider it, well, that's abstract, it's not real. But I read bourgeois foreign policy journals. I can't help myself. I look at them all the time. And what do they debate? They debate things like how long or how short will a war with China be? What kind of weapon system should be used? Should the U.S. modernize its nuclear weapons? It goes on and on and on and on. And if U.S. war planners are taking this seriously, I think those of us who wish to build the peace movement need to take it very seriously too. So if we look at stuff like, or things like, the issue of context, which I think is extremely important, I think two things stand out. One is the U.S. is a declining empire, and that decline has been accelerating. And just to pull out a few numbers around it. In 1950, the U.S. had about half the world GDP. At this point, it has about half of that, at about 23, 24%, something like that. If you look at basic production indexes, U.S. versus China, you will find things like China has about 63 times the shipbuilding capacity as the United States. You will find things like in a couple of months, or actually a single month period, China expands its capacity to produce electricity at the rate that often takes the United States 7 years. Pardon me, 2 years, a year. 2 years, actually, is what the number that I was actually looking for. I'm actually very good with numbers, but when I start blah, 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 well, maybe I'll make a couple of mistakes, but that's okay too. But the basic point is this. The United States is in a period of decay and decline, while China is going through a peaceful rise and is essentially ascendant, and that's a very important thing in terms of shaping the world today. And as we all know, where economic power lies, so will political and military power, and that's a lot, again, of what's the stage that we're working on in this period. So looking at U.S. foreign policy, we see a couple of things that are genuinely important. In the economic sphere, the United States is trying to decouple or de-link the U.S. economy from China. And therefore you see an entire host of measures, including industrial policy. For example, I don't know if people saw it, but Trump chose to use his golden share to keep the steel facility in Granite City, Illinois open. That is one of the things that the U.S. is doing in terms of, again, separating itself from the world economy, particularly China's economy. Two, there's the whole tariff regime that is taking place. It was mentioned earlier, about up to 143%. It's actually substantially below that. But the point is, you see this decoupling and delinking. And I think perhaps most importantly, you see the U.S. retreating and withdrawing from institutions of global governance such as the WTO. And I think that's kind of a vital thing. I think some of us, actually I know quite a few of you here, we were old enough to be fighting the World Trade Organization back in 1999. And many of us were arrested in those demonstrations, and they were actually quite dramatic, particularly the ones in Seattle. At this point, it is the U.S. government that is dismantling the World Trade Organization by refusing to appoint people to the adjudication, to the mechanisms that actually judge disputes. So you see the whole thing of the WTO actually drawing to a stop. Or to pick another example, in Washington, D.C., they're talking about having the U.S. withdraw from the International Monetary Fund. By the way, the U.S. is the only country that has actual veto power over what the fund does, but nonetheless, it is an actual discussion that's taking place in Washington, D.C. As the U.S., again, the empire shrinks and it withdraws from multilateral institutions. And what's replacing that, in fact, is an attempt to use military power to mask economic weakness. Military power to mask economic weakness. So in the budget that's being proposed for this upcoming year, 2026, we find money for a massive military buildup that's aimed at China. And this is absolutely true, and it's absolutely real, and we absolutely have to take it seriously. And the war planners at the Pentagon, what they are trying to do is, number one, contain China, but number two, stop China from achieving a very important goal, a very important national goal that is vital for its rejuvenation, and that is the liberation and reunification with Taiwan. Taiwan province is a part of China, absolutely a part. In 1662, I think it was, I am good at some numbers, the Chinese were able to throw out the Dutch colonialists who set themselves down on Taiwan. China and Taiwan is the same place, the same country, and the liberation of Taiwan from separatists and their U.S. backers is something that is not going to be off the agenda forever. In fact, it's on the agenda. The clock is ticking, and the U.S. would do well to stay out of an important historical process. And I think this is actually a vital point to understand. China's cause in Taiwan is a just cause, and it deserves the support of all progressive people. Yeah. So by way of a conclusion, and I think I probably am going over my time, but if I am, maybe you'll allow me a couple of more minutes. But by way of a conclusion, let me say this. China wants peace and progress, and I think China shows that all the time. For example, let's just pick a particular place, and that is Gaza, where China is talking about committing massive amounts of money, I believe it's $100 million, for the rehabilitation of Gaza. What does the U.S. do there? It sponsors a genocide. That is the tale of compare and contrast, the tale of two cities, two places, and two futures. Thank you very much.